The Butcher of Baghdad, Hulaqu Khan's brutality and the rise of the Turks. Long before the modern world drew its borders, before nations carved their names into stone and sand, there existed a city so magnificent that travelers wept when they first saw it rising from the desert horizon. Baghdad was not merely a capital. It was the beating heart of human civilization. At its peak in the 13th century, it housed over 1 million souls within its famous circular walls that had been designed by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur to represent the perfection of God's creation. The city's libraries contained more books than any other place on earth. Its scholars translated Aristotle and advanced mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy at a rate that made the rest of the world look asleep. The House of Wisdom, founded centuries earlier, had become the single greatest repository of human knowledge ever assembled. Men traveled from China, from India, from the farthest corners of Europe just to sit in its reading rooms and breathe its air. That if you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love. And then came the storm. Hulaqu Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan, born into a dynasty that had already shattered empires like pottery thrown against a stone wall. He was not a savage in the way the word is misused. He was calculating, patient, and utterly without mercy when mercy was not strategically useful. His mother was an Nestorian Christian, and some historians have pointed to this as a reason for the particular fury he directed at the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate. But the truth is far more complicated, and that complexity is exactly where this story begins to reveal its most shocking layers. In 1255, Hulaqu was commissioned by his brother, the great Khan monk, to expand Mongol dominion westward. His orders were to subdue the assassins of Persia, bring the Abbasid Caliph to submission, and push the Mongol Empire all the way to Egypt. It was an ambition so vast that it should have been impossible, and yet Hulaqu moved with terrifying efficiency. He dismantled the assassin stronghold of Alamut in 1256, pulling out its famous library and allegedly destroying it, though some texts may have survived. That was merely the warm-up. By 1257, Hulaqu had sent envoys to Baghdad demanding the Caliph al-Mustasim submit to Mongol authority, dismantle his walls, and offer tribute. Al-Mustasim was a man drowning in bad advice and worse confidence. His court was fractured by political rivalries, and his minister Ibn al-Alqami, a Shia Muslim who deeply resented the Sunni caliph's years of marginalization, reportedly sent secret communications encouraging the Mongols to advance. This is the first great twist of history that most people never learn. Baghdad was not simply conquered from outside. It was, in part, betrayed from within. Ibn al-Alqami allegedly gave Hulaqu information about the strength of the caliph's forces, downplayed the city's defenses, and encouraged the caliph to believe that no Muslim army in history had ever been able to sack Baghdad, so this one would fail too. It was a lie wrapped in flattery, and al-Mustasim believed it. The caliph sent a dismissive reply to Hulagu's demands. He reminded the Mongol general that the caliphate was the spiritual center of all Islam, and that any army that dared attack, it would face the wrath of every Muslim on earth. It was a bold declaration. It was also the last meaningful political statement he would ever make. Hulaqu arrived outside Baghdad's walls in January of 1258 with an army that some historians estimate at 100,000 soldiers, though the exact number is disputed. What is not disputed is what happened next. The Mongol forces surrounded the city on both sides of the Tigris River, cutting off any possibility of escape or resupply. The caliph, finally realizing the danger, sent an army to engage the Mongols in the field. It was obliterated. The Mongols breached Baghdad's outer fortifications within days. By February 10th of 1258, the caliph surrendered personally, hoping that his submission might earn mercy for his people. There was no mercy. What followed was a massacre so complete, so total in its destruction, that even Mongol chroniclers recorded it with a kind of awe. The killing went on for days. Some accounts say 13 days. Some say as many as 40. The numbers of the dead range wildly depending on the source, from 100,000 to over 1 million, though most scholars today estimate several 100,000 lives were extinguished in that single catastrophic week. The streets of Baghdad ran with blood so thick that the Tigris River itself turned red and then black from the ash of burning books. The libraries were destroyed. Scholars who had spent their lives translating and preserving the wisdom of ancient civilizations were cut down alongside merchants, children, and soldiers. The Mongols threw so many manuscripts into the Tigris that, according to legend, a man could cross the river by walking on books. Now here is where the story takes its second extraordinary twist, the one that changes everything you thought you knew about this catastrophe. Hulaqu Khan did not kill everyone, and his reasons for sparing certain populations reveal something deeply uncomfortable about the politics of faith and power. The Christian communities of Baghdad were largely spared, in part because of the influence of Hulagu's Christian wife, Dokuz Khatan, who reportedly pleaded for their lives. The Jewish communities were also largely protected. It was specifically the Muslim population that bore the full weight of the slaughter. This has led historians into centuries of debate about whether the Mongol sack of Baghdad was a religious genocide, a political conquest, or simply the brutal mechanics of imperial expansion. The answer, as with all things in real history, is all three simultaneously, layered over each other in ways that resist easy simplification. Al-Mustasim himself was executed, but even his death contained a strange theater of cruelty and superstition. The Mongols believed that royal blood must never touch the earth, so the last caliph of the Abbasid dynasty was reportedly wrapped in a carpet and either beaten to death or trampled by horses, depending on which account you read. One of the longest-standing political and spiritual institutions in Islamic history ended not with a battlefield death, but with a man rolled in felt and crushed beneath hooves on the banks of the Tigris. The caliphate, which had endured for over 500 years, simply ceased to exist. And now the story pivots in the direction that history chose, because Hulaqu Khan's westward march did not continue unopposed. This is the third and most dramatic twist of all. The Mongols, having destroyed Baghdad, pushed into Syria and took Damascus. They seemed unstoppable. The Islamic world was in genuine existential crisis. Egypt was next. The Mamluk Sultanate, a dynasty of soldiers who had themselves once been enslaved Turkic warriors before rising to power, stood between the Mongols and the complete conquest of the Arab world. In 1260, at the Battle of Ain Jalut in what is now modern Israel, the Mamluks met the Mongol forces and did something no army in the known world had managed to do. They defeated them decisively in open battle. The Mongol general Kitbuka was killed. The advance was stopped. The Islamic world exhaled for the first time in years. But the reason the Mongols were even stoppable at Ain Jalut involves another layer that most history videos never mention. Hulaqu Khan himself had pulled a significant portion of his army back east because his brother Monk had died and a succession crisis demanded his attention. The Mongols at Ain Jalut were a fraction of their full strength. History hung on a succession dispute thousands of miles away. This is what makes history so addictive. The hinge moments are so fragile. Move one piece and everything changes. Now consider the rise of the Turks in the wake of this devastation. The Mamluk Sultanate that stopped the Mongols was itself a Turkish institution, soldiers of Kipchak Turkic origin who had been brought as slaves into Egypt and who had overthrown their masters to rule in their own right. Their victory at Ain Jalut was not merely a military victory for Egypt. It was the announcement of a new power center in the Islamic world, one that was distinctly Turkic in its military culture and political organization. The destruction of the Arab Abbasid Caliphate and the subsequent rise of Turkic military power as the dominant force in the region laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Ottoman Empire, the most powerful Islamic political entity in world history, which would itself last from the 14th century all the way to 1922. In other words, Hulaqu Khan's brutality, designed to erase Islamic civilization, inadvertently accelerated the conditions that would produce Islam's most durable empire. The Mongols broke the Arab political model so completely that a new model had to emerge, and the Turks were waiting. There is a final haunting detail that deserves to be spoken aloud. Some historians argue that the destruction of the House of Wisdom and the broader intellectual infrastructure of Baghdad set back human civilization by centuries. The translations that were lost, the commentaries burned, the scholars killed, represented a body of accumulated knowledge that took generations to partially reconstruct. The Islamic Golden Age, that extraordinary era of scientific and philosophical advancement, effectively ended at Baghdad in February of 1258. We can only wonder what discoveries might have been made, what medicines invented, what astronomical observations recorded, if those libraries had survived. The Tigris still flows through Baghdad today. The city rebuilt itself over centuries, was conquered again, changed hands repeatedly, suffered through modernity's own particular forms of violence. But there is something that has never quite been recovered. Not the books, not the scholars, not the confidence of a civilization that once genuinely believed it stood at the center of human progress. Hulaqu Khan died in 1265, 7 years after the fall of Baghdad. He never reached Egypt. His descendants eventually converted to Islam, the faith of the people he had slaughtered. History's ironies are without end. What happened in Baghdad in 1258 was not just a massacre. It was the violent end of one world and the violent beginning of another. The butcher of Baghdad did not simply kill people. He killed an age. And in the ruins he left behind, a new power rose that would reshape the map of civilization for the next 700 years. That is the story of Hulaqu Khan. That is the weight of what one man and one army did in one brutal winter. And that weight has never fully been lifted. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching this from?